There is deep concern growing within the Biden White House about the classified documents found at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. That's despite the administration publicly maintaining their distance from the investigation. Current intelligence officials are also worried, a source telling CNN that people within the intelligence community have talked with the Justice Department, congressional intelligence committees, and the National Archives in recent months about potentially missing sensitive documents. CNN's Arlette Saenz is following this from the White House in Wilmington, Delaware. Arlette, what more are you learning about how the Biden administration is viewing this investigation into Trump?
Well, Jim, the White House has largely refrained from commenting on that FBI search of the Mar-a-Lago estate, trying to keep some distance from the Justice Department's probe. But privately, officials are expressing concern about the former President Donald Trump taking some of these classified documents to his Florida home. And that includes whatever implications this might have for the intelligence community. Now, the White House does not know exactly what material was taken by the president, but there are concerns that sources and methods that the intelligence community uses to collect information could be at risk. Many of these types of materials that were taken were classified, top secret, needing to be viewed in highly secured settings, but instead they were down in Mar-a-Lago in various places, including a basement level storage facility. Now, the intelligence community has also expressed some concerns about what exactly the former president has taken. As you mentioned, there's been some discussions about possibly missing sensitive documents. There are also some diplomatic implications and concerns of whether there might be any tension that arises with allies about some of those documents that the former president might have taken with him. We know from reporting that some of the documents that the FBI found, including information on French President Emmanuel Macron. Now, the White House has really taken great lengths to try to keep themselves and adopt this very tight-lipped strategy when it comes to that FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. The White House has said that President Biden has not been briefed on the probe, and they don't know exactly what materials were seized during that search, but they still are, even if they're not saying anything publicly, privately, they are voicing deep concern about those classified documents.
All right, Arlette Saenz, thank you very much. I'm joined now by two former staffers from the Trump administration, high-level staffers, former White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham. She's the author of I'll Take Your Questions Now, What I Saw at the Trump White House. Also with us, Olivia Troye, former advisor to Vice President Mike Pence. And Olivia, I know you were in the national security realm working with the Vice President at the time, and we don't know what's in those top secret documents from Mar-a-Lago. And we also don't know, we don't have an answer to the question why Trump took them to Mar-a-Lago. We still don't have an answer to that question, despite everything that he said since that search took place. But what do you make of people expressing these private concerns inside the Biden White House about these documents? I suppose it goes without saying that they would be concerned about this.
They should be concerned. I think anyone who cares about our national security and intelligence community should be gravely concerned about the fact that these documents have been missing and were not properly stored. I think, what you're seeing here is the community wondering what exactly is at risk, and are sources and methods. Have they been compromised, and what do they need to be doing to protect the rest of the intelligence enterprise, as well as intelligence officers and military officers who potentially are deployed overseas and running operations on the ground? And look, if you're a foreign partner who sometimes shares intelligence with the United States, given the fact that Donald Trump was pretty much exhibited bedfellows behavior towards some of our foreign adversaries at times, if you're an international partner, they should be concerned as well. I'm sure that they're watching this, wondering what does this mean for them in terms of compromising their intelligence and their defense posture in conjunction with ours.
Right, and Stephanie, you know Mar-a-Lago well. You spent time there when you worked with Donald Trump as president. And his allies, he and his allies claimed that he had a standing order to declassify any sensitive materials that he wanted to bring home, bring down to Mar-a-Lago. Was this ever a topic of discussion when you were the White House press secretary, that there might be concerns about Trump bringing, top secret classified documents down to Mar-a-Lago or mishandling them in some way at the property?
It was never discussed. I've talked about this before a little bit. We didn't exactly have a culture of compliance at the White House when it came to how we handled things, and I think that came straight from the top, as we're certainly learning now. But he did things all the time that made people kind of shake their heads and have to scramble later. There was never a standing order. I never heard of a standing order. I was never told when I became press secretary and director of communications and got my briefings. That was never something in a briefing that I received. So as usual, this is them trying to throw some, anything at the wall to see what will stick and distract people from the fact that he potentially broke the law and potentially put the country and, as Olivia was saying, our intelligence community, potential foreign intelligence sources, potentially in danger. And that's very, very serious.
And Stephanie, just a follow up to that. I mean, given what you know about Mar-a-Lago, is that a place to take top secret classified documents and store them, do you think?
Absolutely not. Mar-a-Lago, when we were down there, despite it being called the Winter White House, it was a membership club first and foremost. Members could bring guests. There was very little vetting. I know that the president's current lawyers are saying it's this very secure property, but that's just not true. A teenager got on property once just to see if he could do it. Of course, we had a Chinese national who got on property one time. You go down to that beach area and anybody can access Mar-a-Lago from the beach. There is Secret Service there, but they're just looking for weapons. They're not checking IDs. They're not seeing who's coming. So Mar-a-Lago is honestly probably one of the worst places I can imagine it being of all the Trump properties.
And Olivia, you were one of some 18 officials, former Trump administration officials, contacted by CNN who, described this standing order excuse coming from Trump world as ludicrous. Why did you say that? What were your thoughts there?
Well, I feel like as someone who worked on counterterrorism issues globally and Homeland Security, I would have probably been briefed about this blanket authority that existed. I think Mike Pence would have been aware of it, and the national security advisors would have heard about this. But thus far, if that's the case, then release the paperwork. There's got to be a paper trail here because it doesn't just kind of happen overnight. You don't just wave a wand and say, boom, miracle, it's declassified. It's a long process here that would involve the White House counsel. It would involve the intelligence community, the director of national intelligence, and there would be a paper trail, like I said. And it would also, these documents would also be stamped. There should be some sort of notice on them that says declassified on so and so date by President Donald Trump at the time, or whatever sort of emblem that should be on there that specifically states this. And so it's fine, let's go down that route and we'll see if those documents surface along the way. But thus far, those of us who served in national security, especially in the Trump White House, have not heard of any such thing.